Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, if you saw the last video, you know that it kind of cut off a bit abruptly in an unplanned way, and that's because the chipstack and roll-up were originally intended to be one video, but I was noticing that it was getting kind of long and decided to cut it into two pieces. So here's the second piece, and just a little side note about how these videos are made. They're all improvised in one take. There is no script, and sometimes things don't go exactly the way I expected them to. So here we go, back to the process. Let's do the roll-up. I've made ahead of time a 10 mil solid punty with a kind of a flattened end that I'm going to use to pick up the piece. So here goes. I like to get the clear punty kind of ripping hot while getting my stack kind of barely hot enough to stick. I want to have kind of minimal distortion of my pattern. So at this point, things are very unstable, and I need to be careful. I'm preheating my tongs so that I don't shock the piece too bad when I touch it. Kind of clean up my weld a little bit here. I definitely don't want my piece to fall off. But also, I don't want the world's greatest weld, especially if the clear intrudes into my pattern. So like everything in glasswork, it's always a balance. So I'm looking to see which one is my better side. What I'm going to be doing here is very gently forming this piece into a kind of a D shape, because I'm trying to bring the edges together, but I want them to come together in a parallel orientation, and so instead of initially forming into a cylinder, I'm going to be forming into a more of a D shape, and there goes my attachment. I guess I didn't attach it as well as I thought I did. This is always the scariest part of the operation. Of course, it's probably only scary because I'm still kind of new at it. But this is definitely where the piece is very unstable. Okay, so now I have tagged the pieces together. Trying to keep everything nice and hot and happy. The place where the two pieces join has barely been tagged. It is absolutely not a finished or stable weld, but hopefully it'll be stable enough to get the piece into the next stage. So now I'm very gently and slowly rounding it out. I made ahead of time some little glass cups. Got a little cup with a blow tube and then another little cup on a punty that I'm going to cap the ends of this guy with and turn it into a cylinder, and then I can put air into it and blow it out, melt it in, condense it down. One thing that I learned a long time ago, and I'm trying to work on in my glass work, actually I learned it in pilot school, where flight instructors say, avoid fixation. And in the context of aviation, it's like, oh, I'm concentrating totally on my altitude and I let my airspeed get wrong, or I'm totally looking out the window looking for traffic and I get my bank angle wrong. And it's basically you concentrate on one thing and ignore the other important things that are going on. And in glasswork, what I find is that sometimes I'm concentrating on one thing, like in this case rounding out the end, and I totally don't pay attention to keeping my connection point hot or working on any kind of a piece with two ends and concentrating on one end, letting the other end get cold. And of course, we know what happens to cold glass. Well, that is just about ready to weld onto my pre-made cup. I'm getting the end of this cup fairly ripping hot. And with that, I have achieved a lot more stability. Of course, this weld isn't perfect either, so you gotta work the key to this work: don't dawdle. I've got a fairly unstable piece here. With a rather imperfect weld. But it continues to increase in stability as I go. Kinda slowly getting it into shape, making sure to keep the whole thing hot. This gives me an opportunity to fix those corners, those edges that I was talking about when I was at the fusing station. Also, being very careful, I introduced a bit of a twist, and now I'm working on detwisting it. Do a little work on this back weld. Okay. And now I'm going to get my other little cup, one on the end of a punty, and check its size. This one is a little big. They're all a little big. I always make them a little big because it's easier to reduce their size at this point. Once again, I'm getting the clear little cup really super hot. Okay, so they're now substantially more stable. And I'm gonna hook up a blow hose so I can put some air into it. Now for this next operation, I'm going to be switching to single-handed work. I don't quite have the skill to do the very loose and sloppy melting in and condensing and blowing out. I don't quite have the skill yet to do that double-handed, and I can kind of sort of make it work single-handed. I'm getting it pretty hot, letting it rest for a moment. Trying to get a nice uniform thickness round bottom, which I have done. So even though I'm mainly concentrating on the far end, can't let the near end get cold. So what I'm doing here doing a little bit of blow. Just a little. A little bit of condensing down. Trying to avoid twist. This is probably the one area of the process where I'm least confident in my ability. So I'm going to try to condense it down a little now that I've blown it out a bit. Trying to hit a target diameter. Which I've already preset. I've already pre-measured and preset my target diameter into my handheld U-marver. So it's looking pretty good. I'm going to switch axes now. Switch ends, because it's really hard to melt in the punty end without destabilizing it. I've got to make sure to keep that end nice and hot. I've got a pre-made flared tube. That's one thing I'm getting better at, is preparing for the next operation. Having a flared tube ready to go. So I'm going to open up a hole in the end. One of the things works pretty well on the NQALHA. So the procedure I'm going to use here is straight out of the scientific textbook. Don't want to let that end get cold while I'm heating everything up. You get the two mating surfaces ripping hot, then push, pull, and blow. And if everything works, I'll get a really nice connection. One thing that I've noticed, a lot of hand workers, when they do a connection like this, they get the connecting point super sloppy hot. And yes, that works for hand work, and very skilled hand workers can get away with it, but on the NQALHA, it often leads to a twisted mess. So working with the NQALHA is more like the scientific style of lathe work where you try to work as cold as possible, just barely hot enough to get the glass to do what you need it to do, but not so hot that you lose control. Now I'm gonna get my blow tube on this piece. And melt in the far end. While not fixating on the far end, and keeping the near end hot enough that it still stays under control. Let it sit for a moment. Blowing out just the littlest bit. I want to make sure that everything is melted in all the way throughout the piece. At this point, I'm also trying to look at the pattern and seeing if I have any twist. And if I do, I'm working on the U-marver to try to get the twist out. Looking pretty good. Okay. Actually looking very good. So now I've got the handheld U-marver, an experimental prototype tool that I developed, not currently for sale. And this is designed for precisely sizing glass. Boy, my eyeball is getting pretty good. I just eyeballed that and it's almost perfect. For sleeving, it's important to have the your diameters matching the inside diameter of your sleeve. And the handheld U-marver does a fine job just the tiniest amount to finish up here. Stop the NQALHA to control that off center. I'm also reversing direction. Can't really talk while I'm blowing. And that is pretty much the size it needs to be. And a few little touch-ups by hand. Pattern looks very much on center. Got no twist, or I shouldn't say no twist. I have a very tiny amount of twist, probably the best control of twist I've ever done. Giving it a last inspection. Looks like it's straight, on center, and looking pretty good. I'll give it a minute here on the NQALHA before, don't want to put it in the kiln when it's too hot. One of the things my teacher showed me, I was working in his shop and making a piece and went over to put it in the kiln. He says, "No, don't put it in the kiln, it's too hot." So learn that lesson. So here is the piece. Looking pretty good. So That's it for today's glasswork. As always, it's been fun, and thank you for watching.